Before we begin, imagine a man who lived alone for 11 long years, convinced that silence was safer than hope, until one cold night, fate collapsed on his doorstep in the form of a wounded Apache woman. Her arrival would drag him back into a world he thought he'd left behind, danger, betrayal, and a truth powerful enough to change both their lives forever. If you love gripping Wild West stories filled with emotion and mystery, make sure to subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps these tales alive. Now let's get started with this story. The wind pressed against the old cabin like a wandering beast, dragging dust across the empty plains as if trying to erase every footprint of the past. Inside, the cowboy sat by the fading glow of his lantern, sharpening a knife out of habit rather than need. 11 years alone had taught him to rely only on the company of silence, broken now and then by the groan of the wooden floor or the distant cry of coyotes. He liked it that way, quiet, predictable, untouched. After losing everything once, he never planned to let another soul close enough to take anything from him again. But the night had a strange feel to it, a heaviness that made even the fire hesitate before crackling. He sensed it long before he heard anything, the subtle shift in the air, the way his horse outside snorted nervously, the sudden stillness that wrapped around the cabin like a warning. He set the knife down slowly, rising to his feet with the same instinct that had kept him alive in a land that judged weakness without mercy. Something was out there, something moving toward his door with the weight of desperation. A soft thud interrupted the silence, barely audible yet unmistakable, as though someone had collapsed just beyond the threshold. The cowboy froze, hand hovering near the revolver at his hip, though he didn't draw it. Instead he listened so hard he could hear his own breath echo inside his ribs. Another sound followed, a strained exhale, the kind made by someone whose strength had already fled. That was enough to push him forward. He unlatched the door and swung it open, prepared for anything, except what he actually found lying in the dirt. An Apache woman, young but clearly battered by miles of hard travel, lay slumped on his doorstep as if the land itself had delivered her to him. Her braids were dusty, her dress torn, and her skin glistened with feverish sweat. A faint tremble ran through her body, but her eyes, half open and dark as midnight, searched his face with a mixture of exhaustion and warning. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat and dissolved into a choked gasp. The cowboy knelt beside her, one hand hovering uncertainly above her shoulder. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar crash through the armor he had built. A sharp pull, part concern, part instinct, part memory of a man he thought he'd buried long ago. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what trouble might be clawing at her heels. But she was dying right there on his doorstep, and his conscience, quiet for so long, suddenly roared awake. He slipped an arm beneath her, feeling how light she was, how fragile beneath the dirt and grit. Without a word, he carried her inside and laid her near the warmth of the fading fire. Her breathing stuttered as he checked her pulse, rough hands surprisingly gentle as they brushed the tangled strands of hair from her face. She was burning up. Fever this high could swallow a person whole if help didn't reach them fast enough. He fetched water, dampened a cloth, and pressed it to her forehead. She winced but didn't pull away. Up close he noticed the cut along her arm, deep but hastily wrapped with torn fabric. Someone had treated her, but not well. Or maybe she had treated herself while running from something far worse than the wound itself. She whispered something, so faint he leaned closer just to catch the ghost of it. A name, maybe, a warning, a plea, he wasn't sure. All he knew was that she was fighting to stay conscious, eyelids fluttering like the wings of a frightened bird. He tried to give her water, letting drops fall against her lips until she forced herself to swallow. It wasn't much, but enough to ease the tightness of her breathing. She opened her eyes again, and this time they held his with surprising clarity, as though she had willed every remaining ounce of strength into that single look. The fire reflected in those dark eyes, but there was something else too, fear, urgency, and a story heavy enough to break a person. The cowboy felt it more than he understood it. He had spent 11 years mastering the art of staying disconnected, but the weight of her gaze cracked something wide open. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She was a question that demanded an answer, a life placed in his hands without warning. And as she struggled to sit up, he gently pushed her back down, murmuring for her to save her strength. It had been so long since he'd spoken softly to anyone that the sound startled even him. Outside, the wind grew harsher, rattling the windows as though urging him to decide what kind of man he would be when dawn arrived. The plains had a way of punishing those who hesitated. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, watching the rise and fall of her breaths, uneven but still fighting. This land didn't deliver people by accident, not out here, not after dark. He had spent more than a decade believing fate had no interest in him anymore, but now fate was lying on his floor, asking for help without saying a word. He sat beside her, guarding her like he used to guard the ones he loved, before life carved those memories out of him and left him hollow. Every minute that passed, her breathing steadied just a bit more, not enough to bring relief, but enough to keep him from losing hope. She shifted slightly and her hand brushed his wrist, not intentionally, but enough to freeze him in place. Her skin was warm, too warm, but the touch carried something else, a silent trust, fragile and unasked for, yet undeniable. The cowboy leaned back against the wall, exhaling deeply as he watched over the stranger whose arrival shattered 11 years of solitude. He didn't know what sunrise would bring. He didn't know who might come searching for her or what dangers she had outrun. But one thing was certain, the life he had kept locked away for more than a decade had just been interrupted, by fate, by chance, or by something neither of them understood yet. And as the firelight flickered across the room, he realized that his quiet world would never be the same again. Morning crept slowly across the plains, washing the cabin in pale gold light. The cowboy hadn't slept, not even for a minute. He kept watch beside the injured woman, listening to her quiet breathing and the distant rumble of approaching wind. Something gnawed at him. Something he couldn't name but felt in his bones. The world outside looked deceptively calm, but calm never lasted long in the west. He rose, checked his rifle, and stepped outside. The ground was covered in faint tracks, horses, 3 or 4 passing not far from his cabin, fresh, too fresh to ignore. Whoever those riders were, they were looking for someone. Diana woke with a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her side as though she expected another blow. The cowboy rushed back inside just as her eyes darted around the room, searching for threats. When she saw him, she relaxed only slightly, her breath uneven. He knelt beside her and offered water again. She drank slowly, painfully, but enough to bring some color back to her cheeks. "They're coming," she whispered. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from urgency. "They won't stop until they find me. You must leave, they'll kill anyone who shelters me." But the cowboy didn't flinch. He'd faced death before. It no longer held the same power over him. "Why are they after you?" he asked firmly. Diana looked toward the window, as though expecting shadows to materialize at any moment. "Because I know what they did," she said. "A group of soldiers raided an Apache village mine. They were ordered to clear the land no matter the cost. Men, women, children, all gone. I escaped. I saw their faces. I heard their plans. They can't afford a witness." The cowboy felt something inside him tighten. He knew cruelty. He had seen war twist men into monsters. But hearing the truth in her trembling voice struck a chord he didn't expect. He handed her a blanket and stood. "I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. She stared at him, confusion flickering across her feverish gaze. "Why would you risk your life for me?" she whispered. He looked away, jaw tightening. "Because someone once risked theirs for me. I owe that debt to the world, even if it's just once more." Diana studied him for a long moment, and for the first time she let herself breathe easier. Trust, slow, fragile, but real, settled between them like newly fallen snow. By midday the horse tracks had multiplied, more riders, closer. The cowboy guided Ayana to a hidden corner behind stacked crates, covered with blankets to conceal her. She protested at first, insisting she could fight, but one attempt to stand sent pain shooting through her body. She had no strength for battle. With reluctance she allowed him to hide her, though her eyes burned with frustration. "If they find me, run," she whispered. He shook his head with a grim smile. "I stopped running 11 years ago." Then he stepped outside, closing the cabin door behind him. The riders appeared like storm clouds on the horizon, 5 men armed and confident, their horses kicking up dust. They slowed as they approached, forming a half-circle in front of the cabin. The leader, a scar-faced soldier with a cold grin, dismounted and studied the cowboy with a mocking tilt of his head. "You alone out here?" he asked. "Always," the cowboy replied evenly. The soldier stepped closer, boots crunching on dry soil. "We're looking for a fugitive Apache woman, dangerous, escaped, might be injured. You see anyone pass through?" The cowboy's heart hammered against his ribs, but his expression remained calm, unreadable. "Haven't seen a soul in weeks," he replied. The soldier studied him, eyes narrowing as though peeling back layers of truth and lies. The other riders scanned the land, restless. "Mind if we check inside?" the leader asked, not as a question but a challenge. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and brittle. Then the cowboy stepped aside, opening the door. "Check all you want," he said. "Nothing here but dust and old bones." The soldiers rummaged through the cabin, overturning crates, kicking aside tools, even dumping out bags of grain. Every second felt like a noose tightening around the cowboy's neck. He positioned himself casually near the crates, hiding Yana, body tensed, ready to draw his gun if even a hint of discovery appeared. One soldier moved closer to the corner, boots scraping the wooden floor. Yana held her breath behind the blankets, fingers digging into the fabric. The soldier reached out, then was distracted by the leader's shout. "Nothing here, mount up." Relief washed through the cowboy so violently he nearly collapsed. But just as the soldiers stepped outside, the leader paused at the doorway. "Funny thing," he said without turning around. "We found tracks, fresh, leading right to your door." The cowboy's hand hovered near his revolver, but he forced himself to stay still. "Plenty of strays pass through," he said. "Tracks don't mean much." The leader finally turned, his eyes cold and knowing. "They do when they're barefoot," he said. Silence punched through the air. The cowboy didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then the leader smirked. "But I suppose we'll keep searching, for now." They rode off, dust swirling behind them like a dark omen. Once they disappeared over the ridge, the cowboy returned inside. Yana crawled out from her hiding place, chest heaving. "You lied for me," she said softly. He shrugged. "Wasn't the first time I lied to stay alive, won't be the last." She smiled faintly, though exhaustion weighed her down again. He helped her to a chair, preparing food, simple broth, but enough to help her strength return. As she ate, she watched him closely, as if memorizing every gesture. Hours passed before she finally spoke again. "Why do you live alone?" she asked gently. The cowboy hesitated, then lowered his gaze. "Lost my wife and son in a raid. I failed them. After that, I didn't have anything left to give." Gianna reached out, her hand brushing his forearm, soft, hesitant. "You didn't fail me," she whispered. "Not today." Her words struck deeper than he expected, like a warm light slipping through a crack in a long-closed door. That night they sat together near the fire, a silence between them that felt less lonely than before. She leaned against his shoulder, exhausted but safe. Outside, the plains breathed in the darkness, peaceful for the first time in days. The cowboy glanced at her, taking in the strength hidden beneath her wounds. She looked up at him, eyes soft, grateful. For a moment, neither spoke. In that quiet, something changed, something unspoken yet undeniable. The cowboy had lived alone for 11 years. And tonight, for the first time, he didn't feel alone at all.